Hi, this is Sarah, the author of the 21st Century Austen Rom Com series, and I'm here today with another video. Since so few of you liked the ASMR planning and writing with me, I thought I'd do some sort of essay videos where you watch me work and I tell you about my life. I tried it a few weeks ago and I talked about my student loan debt and how removing it affected my identity, and a few people in my life sent me some topics that you might find interesting. And of course, you can tell me more in the comments below. So like this video so I know that you want more like these. Subscribe to the channel so you can get updated when these and audiobooks are posted. And ring the bell notification to get notified when new videos go up. And I try to post at least once a week, especially with these types of videos. It's either going to be this, or planning with me, or video updates, or things like that. Audiobooks happen periodically. Today I thought I would talk about my decision to pursue self and indie publishing instead of traditional publishing as an author. And this story starts about 20 years ago in 2004. I had recently graduated with my master's degree in library science. I had gotten my first job. I had not thought about the money accurately because an annual salary had sounded wonderful in concept until I realized it was still not enough to live on. But I had accepted the job, I had started working, and I would need time to get in a position to walk away. So my first year in this job and in this very tiny 600, not even 600 square foot apartment that I was living in was a very lean year. Another part of this was I eventually had to get a second job so that I could afford the heating bills in the apartment because I, a Floridian, was still not completely prepared for life in wintry Massachusetts, but that's another story too. The one thing I had always wanted to do while I was getting my graduate degree, but had not had the time to even consider it, was National Novel Writing Month. For those who don't know, this is a November event where people all over the world commit themselves to writing 50,000 words in the 30 days of November. You would think it was easy, but it's not. You would think it was hard, but it's not. It takes effort, but it's something that any one of us can do. And the most people do it once, and many don't finish, but sometimes making the effort is a big step forward. But I had an idea, not only for the last, at that point I was only about 27, 28 years old, while I had been writing for the vast majority of my life and playing with a very strong idea in my head, I wasn't ready to write it. Instead, I decided to write something that had come to me while I was still in graduate school about hiring a new double. It had started as a dream, it had evolved into conversations, and when I still imagine this book and the places my characters lived, it's still very rooted, and it's published. It's under my fantasy pen name Sara Marks. It came out in 2022. But when I still think of the set in my head and the scenes, it's very rooted in where I was when I was in graduate school. But I had nothing but time, no money to go and do anything. I was new to an area, so I didn't know many people, and it seemed like a good idea to park myself at a Starbucks every so often and type on my laptop, which is precisely what I did. Between the Barnes & Noble and the local Starbucks, I would park it there, order 1 cup of tea, nurse it, refill it with water. Sometimes I would sneak my own cup of tea into places so that I didn't have to pay for more things. It was a very lean time, but I finished that book. And that was the first year I participated in National Novel Writing Month, NaNoWriMo, and I continue to do so. I have done so every year. In fact, my commitment to doing it really did develop who my friendships were strongest with. Over time, the people I wrote with were my best and closest friends, to the extent that as I grew my friend circle in this area, I pulled people in who probably never thought they would sit and write, but they did, and they wrote well, and some of them have continued to write. And others have amazing ideas that I will borrow with their permission. I'm looking at you, Christy. I'm going to borrow all your ideas with your permission. But after leaving that job and moving to my current job and my current home, I had to rebuild friendships. And this was a community that had a lot of good advocates for creative work. One of those people that I met eventually introduced me to a woman I'm still friends with. I'm still friendly with both of them, but one I'm still very good friends with. And she was starting a group for writers who were indie and self-publishing authors. And she invited me to participate. And I came to the table from a completely different perspective. One, I was connected to the writers within this community, so I could bring them to the table. And these were not people who were publishing yet, though they were just writing. And the people I could bring to the table. The people at the table were those who were publishing or ready to publish and looking for support. I also came to the table as a librarian who was involved in the publishing community. I went to Book Expo. I saw what traditional publishers were doing. I got ARC copies, and I was able to show them how books were formatted and things like that, and what trends I was seeing in marketing when publishers marketed to us. And I was also a blogger, a book blogger at the time, and had been researching book blogs. So I knew some of what was going on around me, but I wasn't ready for my books to be read by anybody. I was still writing what is now going to be the Enduring series, but it was at the very early phase where everything in the book was a ripoff of somebody else's work. It was all fan fiction rooted. And you'll read it as you get into the series. There'll be points where you'll be like, this is Buffy, or this is Supernatural, or this is Lord of the Rings, or this is Three Musketeers, or this is Sleeping fucking Beauty. Yeah, it's going to be in all of those. And I have no shame. I'm just stripping out anybody else's content and adjusting things as I go. But I also at the time wanted to write Jane Austen modernizations because I was really good leaning into fan fiction, leaning into other people's structures. But I wanted something of my own within that. And the nice thing about Jane Austen was that in the public domain, there are very few limitations on what I could do. And I had been reading some of the Jane Austen adaptations and fan fiction that were published traditionally. So I started with Pride, Prejudice, and Zombies and was utterly delighted. And when somebody heard how fascinated I was with that, they suggested a whole line of Mr. Darcy centric. It was a trilogy. It's I can't remember there's like one is an assembly such as this, and I think it's Pamela Aden. Anyway, I will find it and put the link to her series in the comment section and description section below, because that changed my life. To read a book that I loved from a different character's perspective, and to get additional content that was not there because you get where he was when Elizabeth was doing other things, really transformed how I looked at Jane Austen books. And then, of course, I found the smutty stuff, and I was just delighted. But I realized I didn't love Regency. I don't care about historical accuracy. That might be the fairest way to put it. But I do like playing with the themes that Austen played with and the perspectives that she didn't get to play with. To this day, when I read Regency era fan fiction for Jane Austen, I really lean into those about the characters we don't get to read about, which is Mary and Kitty, Jane, Darcy, Georgiana Darcy, Bingley. I prefer those perspectives of my story so that I get a better sense of what was going on in the original story. So I sat down with an idea for Pride and Prejudice in a sorority house, the Bennet sisters becoming sorority sisters, and I just wrote it 1 year. And then if you've heard my content about how Modern Persuasion came about, that was a month later, I was already playing with the idea for Modern Persuasion. And this was back in 2014. So about 10 years after I had written my first book, I started writing these Jane Austen modernizations. And while I didn't feel as strongly about what would become Pride, Prejudice, and Pledging, I felt incredibly strong about Persuasion. And with the encouragement of the people in this writing group or publishing group, I took a risk. I had been approached on my book blog by a brand new publisher. They were tiny. They were looking to build and inviting authors, and I submitted Modern Persuasion to them. And by June the next year, after I had written it, they had offered me a contract and I had signed it. And then I waited. And I waited and I watched them publish the other things, and they came back and forth with some comments and some cover designs and never any edits. But they gave me a date and they started promoting it, and we were continuing to discuss, but I was the last book on their docket. I had been the last to approach them, so I was going to be the last published. And the problem with being the last published for a small, struggling publisher is that they've typically run out of money. And while I had sent them Pride, Prejudice, and Pledging as a sequel that they could start working on as quickly as they wanted, I never heard anything back from them until about a month out of publishing. And they were closing their doors. They had run out of money. They were generous enough to return my rights to me since they had nothing to gain. They did it with all their authors. It was a very generous thing for them to do. But it was a lesson in preparing your expectations. I'd also spent the last 2 years watching my new group of friends publish their own books with ease. And I realized I'm fully capable of this. I could do that. And a lot of people will talk to you about the money that you have to put into it and the time and the stress and anxiety. But I've learned a lot about what my strengths are over the past few years since the pandemic started. I've focused almost entirely on what are my strengths instead of my weaknesses, and why should I lean into them, and how can I lean into them better. And and I've done the Clifton Strengths Assessment, and I firmly believe in the language it gives me to talk about those strengths. So I have key strengths that played a role in this decision making. One is that I love learning new things. I can easily get obsessed with learning new things. And by obsessed, I mean, right now I am into cache stuffing, and all I am watching on YouTube, it really is the same content over and over from different people. Learning. The second strength I have is input, which means I am processing this all so that I can turn around and feed it out in another way. I also have strong strategic focused strengths that love creating plans, love creating a strategy and a path to do something. And then I have this one strength that not a lot of people have high up on their list, but I do. It's number 8 for me, and it's self-assurance. So when you hear me talk about something that is subjective with a whole lot of objective truth, that is my self-assurance talking to you. I know what I know. My mother thinks I'm just being stubborn, that I won't hear anybody else's opinion. But what you don't take into account with people like me is that we've heard your opinion. We've talked to you. We know you. We know your opinion. We have learned. We have researched. We have done things that you are not seeing. So by the time I state my factoid that is really my opinion, there's a lot of information behind it. And I'm very confident that I have learned enough to make that proclaimment. Am I always right? Absolutely not. I am rarely perfectly right. But as I learn, it is very easy for me to adapt and acknowledge that I have learned more and made better decisions. It helps me in a lot of ways. So when I decided to shift from this small, traditional, already shut down indie publisher to let's do this myself, my brain's first thought was, fuck yeah, you can do this. But also, you can do this in a month. Can you do it perfectly? Absolutely not. Can you do it successfully? Yeah. Could you do it and still do better? Obviously. But I knew enough to do it, and I knew who to go to for help and feedback. And for the next month, I designed my own cover. You might have it if you were an early reader or a friend of mine. It's the one with the couple holding hands on the cover. designed that myself, early Canva, fell in love with Canva that way. And I quickly realized after hitting publish that there were mistakes made. But the reason I felt so secure in the decision to do this indie self-publishing was because I can make the changes. I'm in control, and I love when I'm in control. It allows me the opportunity to fix. So what got fixed? The cover got redesigned within a year. Someone offered me a free cover redesign because she wanted it to match the rest of the books I kept entering into giveaways. Eventually, I was able to get a stronger edit, and as subsequent books came out, and it was clear that I could do better, I started looking to experts and people I knew who were doing better than I was. And for me, if you're doing better than I am in the same position, I want to know what you're doing so I can try it. And for me, failure is only an opportunity to learn. Something that my learner strength and my self-assurance strength do very well. I rarely get stuck in a failure. Once I can see my way out, I take it. And we'll talk about my biggest failure in another video because it is on the list of things people thought I should talk about. But in this case, there was no failure. There was only growth. And I worried for a time that by doing this, I would get bored of writing. I very often find that when I not master something, but when I master enough of it to feel like I've accomplished it, I get bored. I got bored in phases with knitting. Not to say I'm bored of knitting. I love knitting. But I have to level up every so often. It went from I can do simple things to I need to do more complex patterns to, you know what, I need to create my own patterns. And because I've focused on writing and slowed down the knitting, that need to level it up is not there as much. But I still often feel like that with things. I need to level this up, and that makes me more prone to crazy experimentation. And crazy is not the right word. Sudden experimentation, the idea to shift into Patreon or to try Kickstarters are all born out of my need to keep growing and keep leveling up, to learn something new. And the nice thing about self and indie publishing is it's an ever-changing landscape where I can learn something new from people who are doing it poorly and well. I learned from other people's failures too. Have I regretted that decision? So far, no. I have had things traditionally published, primarily short stories and anthologies, and I often get my back hair up that these other publishers are not doing the level of work that I would put into it. And here I am, only a part-time writer. If this was my full-time job and I had all these books on my plate and a team to help me do that, I would imagine that more would get done, not less. But I'm not. So I'm just me dealing with my books. It makes me less inclined to trust a publisher who's seeking out their own interest and has no wiggle room and cannot change anything. And even though with the Enduring series, everybody thought I should submit that to publishers and get that traditionally published, I ultimately decided I want to stay in control of everything. I want everything to go through me, and that when it goes out, it's the version I want out. And if I'm going to change it, I want to be able to change it. If I'm not happy, I want to fix it. Even if it's just the commas in the wrong place. You can't do that in traditional publishing. That means I'm sticking with indie publishing probably permanently. While I will continue to submit stories when I have time to traditionally published anthologies, I don't feel like I need to do that. I've done it. I've done it for romance. I've done it for horror. I'll probably do it for fantasy. I have some stories that I could do it with. But it's one of those things. I had the experience. I learned from it. I learned a lot from it. And it's accomplished. It's a checklist checked off. So indie publishing is the way I go. This is why I picked and stay with it. And I hope that was insightful. And if you're trying to make this decision for yourself, feel free to ask me questions below. I'm always happy to help, and I will share my knowledge with you, because the nice side of being a learner slash input in the strengths is that not only do I love to learn, but I love to share what I've learned. But I have learned over the years, because I hate being taught something when I am not in the place mentally to learn something. I will only offer you that lesson when you want it. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the video. What is this video? I am editing Citation Needed, which will be book 7 in the 21st Century Austen series. And it is another modernization of Persuasion, but this time we're flipping the genders, like I did with Sweeten Up J. Darcy, which is, as I record this, on Patreon. If you are listening in 2024, it might be in a very different place. But right now, in 2023, it is on Patreon, an exclusive early access for my Patreon supporters, who are amazing people who are keeping me going and learning new things. I am going through the first draft of Citation Needed, making the notes on what I want to change, and really trying to organize the project, because I wrote it differently. It needed a lot more background than it had, and I needed to provide some context for my own brain to understand where my two characters have been, to understand where I wanted them to be now. So as I get ready to write the second draft, I go through this. I'm going to reorder all the scenes to figure out where these sort of flashbacks have to be in the context of the greater story, what needs to be an actual flashback scene-wise, and what can be a reference back to something that happened historically. So I'm making notes. I've got sticky pads, I've got markers, I've got highlighters and pens. This is me in my happy place, and I hope you'll enjoy the book when it's ready. Thanks. Don't forget to like and subscribe so I'll make more videos like this, and you'll get notified when they're published.